Welcome back to the To Be Single or Not to Be podcast. And if you're new here, welcome. But if you've been here before, welcome back. This season is called Let's Talk About Being Authentically Free. And I want to be clear from the beginning because this season is not about fixing yourself. It's not about becoming somebody completely new. And it's absolutely not about how to find a man and keep a man because we've been there, done that, and got the t-shirt. But what it is about is giving yourself permission to show up as who you already are authentically and to plainly say it, standing in the truth of who you are present day, despite people's experience of you prior to this very moment. Because for a long time, what I now realize is how much of my life is what society may call performative, being a yes woman, a people pleaser, a fake ass, no, not being fake, but curated, for lack of a better term. And what I want to say is this very clearly, because it matters. Curation of your life is not a bad thing. It can look like discipline. It can look like wanting your life to be structured a certain way because those things do matter. You got to be focused. But curating parts of your life can be healthy. It can protect you. It can get you through seasons of life. It can get you through highs and lows when it's sometimes we're just going through the motions on autopilot because that's really all we got because life is lifing that bad. So overall, curation can be a thing that really can help you get the life that you desire. But what my 40s really showed me is that when it came to curating this life, I was tired. And I was tired not in just some like dramatic way. I was exhausted. I was tired of carrying myself in this certain version. I was tired of maintaining energy that I no longer had for people, places, and things that no longer serve me. And I was tired of explaining choices that felt right to me, but felt confusing to other people. And that's really where this season was born because this season exists because I'm no longer interested in performing my life for myself or for anyone else. And I'm only interested in showing up as myself and having people accept me for who I am or not. But this episode is a solo conversation because it's reflective, it's honest, and we're going to end it with a resolution, not heaviness, because these are the kinds of conversations that we need to have, not just to survive, but to actually grow in a world that can sometimes feel so loud, so demanding, and overwhelming to the point where we think that growth is like the last thing possible on the list. Like growth is just not on the bingo card. So, and another reason that we need to have these conversations is because of people, people, people. We have been taught that you show up for people and you create community, which is awesome. But we have not been taught really how to sustain or adjust that community at certain stages and spaces of life, because at a certain point in life, people do have expectations of you, and those expectations may have to change. And those people are family, they're friends, their coworkers, their romantic relationships, romantic partners. And often those expectations are not forced upon us. They're things that we help to create. So when we start to shift, when something no longer fits, it can feel uncomfortable, not just for them, but for us too. So this episode is about what happens when you decide to honor who you are now, even if it disrupts the system that people have always been used to when it comes to you. So I want to be explicitly clear about this part also. It's not about, me becoming someone brand new or you becoming someone brand new, but it is about honoring who you already are, the woman that's already there. And if you're in a season where you are questioning what still fits, what still feels aligned, or why certain things feel heavier than they used to, then this conversation is absolutely for you. Let's get into it.
You are listening to the podcast To Be Single or Not to Be by Shaana Montana. A podcast where we talk about the single life, dating, and relationships so you can make a decision at the end of each episode and decide to be single or not to be. That is the final question.
So when I say that my life felt performative and, curated, I want to be really clear what I mean about that, because I'm not saying that I was fake in any way, shape, form, or fashion. I wasn't lying. I wasn't walking around pretending to be somebody that I'm not. I was curated in a space where I was operating in a position that felt true to me all the way up until this point of my life. And there's a difference, because I think that curating your life can be intentional. It can be protective. It can look like boundaries. It can look like choosing what people have access to. It can even look like growth in certain seasons. So for a long time, curating really did work for me. It helped me to show up. It helped me to function. It helped me to keep moving when things in my life felt really demanding or conflicting or heavy or just crazy, insert whatever term. But what I didn't realize at the time was how much energy it really takes to always be a certain way, or always operate within the systems of what others think that you should be. Like, maintaining is the hard part after all these years on earth. It's not in the doing, it's just keeping up the act, so to speak. So, it's like somewhere along the way, that curation really just started to feel less like who I really am right now, and more like showing up to a job, more like clocking in, more like just giving the people what they want because they wanted a certain way, and it was a certain way that I had created. And it wasn't because anyone was forcing me, because I was doing a lot of things just really out of habit, out of expectation, out of, this is what I've always done. And when you live like that long enough, you don't always notice the shift right away. You just start to feel tired more times than not. And what I mean by that is tired of showing up in the same way in rooms that sometimes no longer feel aligned, tired of playing roles that you've outgrown, tired of explaining choices that may feel right to you but need a disclaimer for everybody else. And something that really comes to mind, or I noticed this when I've been in rooms and I've been expected, to turn the people up. I don't mind that, but just all the time being expected to turn the people up when maybe I prefer to be quiet. Or when I've been in the middle of family drama and I was expected, or friend drama too, and I was expected to fix or mediate things. Or when I've been the one that, was doing the work in a relationship and I started to become passive aggressive because I was not getting the same effort that I was giving and the same effort that I know I deserved overall. And going through those experiences, and not saying that they won't come up again, here is what this has taught me in this season. Authenticity and staying true to myself does not require me to burn myself or burn everything around me down to the ground. It does not require me to do more than my share. And it does not require me to be loud or dramatic about it, because, sometimes the authenticity of who you are or of who I am, just ask me to tell the truth to myself first and then stay true to it. And for me, the truth had become really simple. The way that I had been showing up wasn't wrong. It just wasn't sustainable anymore. It's just not sustainable anymore, present tense. So my 40s, they didn't make me want to go out and just become an entirely new person or go against the grain on everything, become a contrarian. They really just made me honest about my energy, honest about my capacity, honest about what actually felt good versus just doing what I was doing just because I had always done it. And this also was not about removing boundaries. This was about changing the energy behind them, because I wasn't closing myself off. I was choosing myself with more intention. And once I saw that, I couldn't unsee it. Once I became aware of, like how much of my life I was running on autopilot, that is when I started like really questioning things like I know I had never done before. And it wasn't in some dramatic way, like not with some big announcement, really, just quiet, honest check-ins with myself. And certain friends started reaching out to me, just like checking on me about my rest. And that is when I knew that was like further confirmation that I was on the right track, because these people knew nothing about what had been going on with me internally. And so I started asking, why do I do this? Why do I show up like this in these spaces the way that I do? And sometimes the answer was more simple than I really initially thought. And it wasn't because it was a bad thing, but mainly because the only reason that I found I was doing many things was because I always had. And then I started to realize that clarity around certain situations just doesn't always feel good. And this was one of those times, because there's something really humbling about realizing that some of your routines, your habits, and even your relationships are being driven more by momentum than intention. And here's the part I want to normalize. Changing doesn't always look bold. Sometimes it looks boring, sometimes it looks quieter, sometimes it looks like doing less and not more. Because we're also taught that growth has to look like this big progress on the outside. New goals, new energy, new everything. And that's not always true, because I found that a lot of my growth has come from subtraction, from asking myself what actually fits, what actually works, what is fun to me, where am I most comfortable in letting go of what does not. And I really started to notice this when I personally just stopped accepting every invitation that was sent my way, whether it be a brunch, a birthday, a bar mitzvah. It used to be, if I got an invite, I would look at my calendar, I would check to see if that day was open, and if it was, I was there. I know, the ghetto, very ghetto. And at first it felt kind of strange, it felt strange because when you stop doing what people expect you to do or what people are used to, even very small changes can feel disruptive. And sometimes that discomfort isn't because the decision is wrong, it's really just because it's new. We're all creatures of habit, so it really is just because it's new. So I had to get comfortable with not having always this fully formed explanation for every choice that I was making, or with letting the answer be that this feels better for me, and sometimes that being enough. And if I was to explain at times, the explanation might have just been that I can't make it. And that got to be enough, because that was enough for me. And although it was new, it got to be enough for you too. And I also realized that I used to make decisions from this place of how will this land with other people? How will this affect everyone else? And now I start with a different question. I start with, how does this affect me? How does this affect me? And that shift alone changed everything, because when you really stop doing things out of obligation or just because you always have, you create a space where you get to actually choose what aligns with who you are now and not with who you used to be. And that kind of growth doesn't need a round of applause. It just needs honesty and authenticity that actually feels the most comfortable and the most true to you. So, all of that said, somewhere along the way, I realized that I really don't have a fear of missing out anymore, FOMO. And that surprised me a bit, because I know that used to be part of the issue. Because for a real long time, being present everywhere felt important to me. And this might be an age thing in some ways, I don't know. Maybe for me it is, maybe not. But it was like if I didn't show up, I felt like I might miss something. I might miss a moment. I might miss a memory. I might miss a connection. I might miss the tea. But, now that feeling just is not there. And it's not because I don't care. It's just because I care differently. I don't feel the need to be everywhere. I don't feel the need to do everything with everybody. And just because someone wants me there does not mean that I have to go, or that I need to go. And that was a hard one for me to shift in, because that shift, it didn't come from detachment. It really came from my own clarity, because I started realizing that my presence is way more meaningful when it's intentional, and that my absence does not mean rejection or anything negative. It really just means that I'm choosing where my energy goes and what I have capacity for at that time or moment. And an example of this was recently I had to cancel some plans for a Galentine's event that me and some girlfriends were going to do in 2026 for an out-of-state trip. And recently, just due to work obligations, I got a new role at work, praise God. I tried to flip this trip and make it happen 48 different ways under the sun. But I just finally realized that due to work obligations and other things, girl, this is probably not the best right now based on all the transitions that you have happening. For one, for you to take this time away from work, but also recognizing that you have another trip that's happening at the end of the same month where you're going to be away. And that's going to take time, energy, money, exhaustion out of you. And in the process of landing on the decision to not go, what changed for me was the question really that I asked myself. While I used to ask myself, will I regret missing this? Now I'll ask myself, will I regret going? Let that one sink in. Because a lot of the times, The honest answer, it surprised me, so I know it will surprise you, because for me, staying home does not feel like missing out, because I also love my house. I love my home. It feels more like me just choosing myself. And once you experience that kind of peace, it's like really hard to go back, because FOMO, it's not always about the event. Sometimes it's more so about not trusting yourself to choose what you actually need. And when that trust is there, the fear tends to disappear. So at a certain point in life, especially at this age, people are going to have expectations of you. Like, that's inevitable. And they're going to be, family expectations, friend expectations, work expectations, relationship expectations. And here's the part that we don't always talk about, or don't talk about enough. And I want to say this clearly. A lot of those expectations were not forced on us. We helped to create them. We showed up in a certain way. We played certain roles. We were reliable. We were consistent. We were dependable. Same thing as reliable. And none of those are bad things at all. None of that was wrong. But this is the part that matters. When you start to grow, when something starts to shift internally, those same expectations can start to feel heavy. And not because the people around you are bad, but because you're no longer the same person you were when those expectations were formed. And that's where the tension shows up. Because when you change, even in small ways, it can make people uncomfortable. And not always because they don't support you or they don't like what you're doing, but because a shift interrupts what they thought had settled. I noticed things like this, and I can think of 2 instances in my life where I was doing the heavy lifting of a relationship. One was what I'll consider a romantic relationship, and one was a friendship. And it was like I was doing every invite, I was doing every check-in, I was doing all the follow-ups. And because of the life that I live and I host a lot of things and I entertain, I don't always mind that. But it was like, I think of the busyness of life, I finally slowed down and realized that I was doing all the work with these people where they were becoming less and less responsive. But when I would pull back, when I realized it, it's like they would try to pull me forward. And what I eventually just realized is that the dynamic was off in both of those situations. And I addressed it, and eventually those relationships went off into the sunset, and may the Lord bless and keep those people. I'm okay with that. But I think in saying all of that, it's really okay to acknowledge when there has been a shift. And you can name it if you need to, because here's the boundary that I really had to learn. It is not my responsibility to get everyone on the same page or on my page when it comes to the book of my life. It's not my job to convince people that my choices make sense to them. It's only my job to live my life in a way that makes sense to me. And that was a hard lesson, because I used to spend a lot of energy managing how my decisions would land, how they would affect other people. I'd explain, I'd soften, I'd over-contextualize, I'd extend so much grace, and I'm still working on it. I'm a work in progress with all this stuff. But eventually what I did realize is that I was exhausting myself trying to make people comfortable with the life that they were not living. Because growth does not require permission, and alignment does not need consensus. Not mine anyway, because you can be kind, you can be respectful, you can be loving, you can be honest, and guess what? Throughout all of that, you can still choose yourself. And if someone struggles with that shift, that does not mean that you've done anything wrong. It means that the relationship is adjusting, or it's revealing something that needs to be seen. And sometimes what needs to be seen is you. You finally showing up in a way that feels right for you without explanation or changing or adjusting. Because again, you have to do what is right for you and what is best for you at all times, despite how it may affect those that interact and are around you. So one of the biggest lessons that I've learned in this season is that not every ending needs an explanation. Because some spaces don't end because something went wrong. They literally end because something has changed. And that change, change doesn't always come with trauma. It doesn't always come with conflict. Sometimes it comes quietly through awareness. You wake up and one day you realize that a space, a routine, or even a relationship no longer fits the way that it used to. And I've had to learn how to acknowledge that without guilt, without villainizing anyone, without creating a story where someone has done something wrong to me, and also, more importantly, without centering myself in the universe of others, because it's not always about me, and vice versa. In places where you may notice this, maybe, a friendship that started to feel forced or starting to get weird for what appears to be no explained reason, or no apparent reason. Rooms that sometimes drain you, that used to energize you, but they no longer do. Or you stop looking forward to doing things or being around people that you once enjoyed. And what may surprise you the most about this is that leaving does not always feel like a loss. Sometimes it feels like relief. And that relief doesn't mean that you didn't care. It means that you're honoring what's true now for you. And let me be honest for a second, because I think this part is a lost art. I've also learned that there is a difference between ending something loudly and ending something gracefully. Because I don't need to announce my exits, I don't need to justify my distance, and I don't need to convince anyone why I'm choosing differently, and neither do you. And what I've gotten really good at this point is like just moonwalking out of spaces that have expired or just do not serve me in a positive way any longer. And honestly, it doesn't mean that I don't appreciate what those spaces gave me. It just means that I don't need to stay past the expiration date or season if it's no longer meant for me. Here's also another truth that may be uncomfortable, but it matters. Everyone gets older, but not everyone grows up, because growth requires reflection. Growth requires accountability. Growth requires communication that is sometimes uncomfortable, and it requires a willingness to see yourself beyond yourself. And when you grow, it starts to become really clear who is growing with you and who isn't. And that clarity is not the cruel kind that I talked about earlier. That's the kind of clarity that we all deserve, because that clarity is the honest one, even if it's hard to accept on the front end on your end or on the back end of the people that it affects. And when I look back over the last couple of years, like literally like past two, this is the most growth personally that I feel like I've experienced in my life that has not come from adding more to my life. My growth has come from choosing differently, choosing what actually feels right for me, choosing what aligns with where I am now, choosing myself before worrying about everyone else and how they may feel about it. And that was a shift. Because as I said before, I used to make decisions from a place of, how will they feel about this before even asking myself how it would affect me. And now I start with a different question. And it's a question I want you to start asking yourself. How does this affect me? And how do I feel about this? Because asking yourself those questions, that doesn't make you selfish. It actually makes you more responsible, because you are the one that has to live with your choices. You are the one that feels the biggest impact of your yeses and of your nos. And for me, authentic freedom for me is not about being reckless or wild or, again, being a contrarian, just going against the grain. But it is about choosing yourself in a way that doesn't make you selfish. It doesn't mean that you're detached. It's not about cutting people off or burning bridges. But what it is intentional. It's about choosing alignment over approval, peace over performance, presence over pressure. And I must say this. I want to pause right here and say this. Give it a little disclaimer, side note. You cannot be the one out here starting shit, starting drama and conflict, and then choosing to hide behind the thing of the performance, the curation, that I put myself first and I'm protecting my peace and I don't want to be grown and have a conversation about the shit that I started. That is not what I'm saying. That's not what I was saying at all. So I just want to give that disclaimer. But I also want to say this, that if you're listening to this and something feels familiar, where you've been feeling tired in ways that rest has not been fixing, if certain things are starting to feel heavier than they used to, if you've been questioning what still fits, I want you to know that you are not behind. What that means is that you are becoming more aware. And awareness is the beginning of freedom. So now I want to leave you with a couple of questions to sit with. Not for you to answer right now, but to notice. Where am I still performing? What expectation am I honoring that no longer fits with who I am today? And when you come up with the answers to those questions, I want you to come back to this episode, because this season, we're going to keep having these conversations, honest ones, grounded ones, the kind that make space instead of noise. So I want to thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And thank you for allowing yourself to grow in real time. This is the To Be Single or Not to Be podcast. And this season, we're talking about being authentically free. Until next time, signing off, yours truly, Shaana Monet.